To start this conversation, I want to add a little history to the relationship between the World YWCA and YWCA USA. Our missions have always been connected, and this meeting today illustrates that connection. We looked at figures like Marihal Zuma, who in 1940 created a local YWCA in South Africa, referred to as Nzile, or self-help, and in 1951, they joined World YWCA, a world movement. On April 24th, 1955, 68 years ago, a group of women, including Dorothy Height and Marihal Zuma, attended the World Meeting in New York with 27 countries in attendance. At this meeting, Marihal Zuma spoke about her work being a connection to the World Movement. She was proud to be affiliated with the World Movement, as she said, "We too are linked with the world." Her sentiment then remains relevant today as our national and world movements continue to connect for a greater purpose. And today, in honor of World YWCA Day 2023, we are joined by Casey Harden, the General Secretary of World YWCA, and Margaret Mitchell, the CEO of YWCA USA, who will have a great conversation about Goal 2035 and how we can move forward to meet it together.
Casey, how are you?
Good, Margaret. It's good to see you as always.
We are definitely connected to the World YWCA, and it is a beautiful connection. And I'm so delighted you're joining me today. As Roxanne said in our introduction, we really want to talk about the World YWCA, the work that you do, our 2035 goal, and our role as USA in the world. And so I want to really kick it off just with a little bit of a primer, and maybe I would love for you just to share sort of your history and background with the YWCA movement.
Sure. So I was lucky enough to begin my YWCA journey with the YWCA of Tacoma Pierce County. I had been working for Planned Parenthood and had been encouraged to pursue an opportunity at that YWCA, and I was indifferent to it. And after about 2 months, I went for an interview, and I left with clammy hands because I didn't go in with clammy hands, but during the interview, I learned a lot about the YWCA that I didn't understand. Particularly about the intersection of the empowerment of women with racial justice, which made sense to me. And also that we were part of a global movement. So I left very nervous with clammy hands and hoping that I would get that job. And that's where my journey began over 20 years ago. And I've been part of this fantastic network of women and still have not looked back. I still feel like I'm a part of it every single day.
Tell me a little bit about World YWCA. How many associations or chapters are there all around the world?
So currently we have YWCA members in over 100 countries, and they're really diverse in how they do their work, how they're structured, how they impact their community, and certainly the advocacy or the direct service or the volunteerism that occurs in those communities. It's very much like YWCA USA, where each association really responds to the unique needs of women and girls in those communities and or the community itself. Yet there's also a collective identity around the leadership of young women. In YWCA USA, there's collective identity as well. So it allows, globally, it's the same model, allowing people to really do good and affect change where they know it needs to happen in their own community.
It's been exciting for me to meet our colleagues in North America, our Canadian partners, YWCA Canada, and they have a very similar structure to ours. There's a national Canadian office, and then there are local Canadian affiliates. Where else in the world would we see this type of structure?
Sure. So the most national member associations do have local associations or affiliates, branches, chapters. The language isn't always the same. In fact, there are some national member associations that are actually not very active. It's the local associations where you would see kind of the touchstone and hub of leadership within those areas. But in the World YWCA identifies many regions within the world, and within them, the same model exists, whether it's on the continent of Africa, Asia, whether it's the smaller island of Fiji, or whether it's Bolivia in South America, and so on and so on.
I know that you travel a lot, visiting associations all over the world. What have you learned? What has surprised you the most? What energizes you the most in your travels?
Sure. Two things. One thing that energizes me, and it's what energizes me every day, even across time and space and in the virtual world or email or a text. And that's really the women, the YWCA women that are just doing phenomenal, responsive, relevant, bold, often very courageous work in areas all around the world. And that's just kind of an intrinsic, basic, fundamental piece, but something that again, I never take for granted, and it never ceases to amaze me. And there's a power to it. It's so rooted, yet it's got wings of its own, which is a really powerful thing to have something so incredibly rooted, but with such strong wings. And then secondly, I would absolutely say there's still a spirit of volunteerism that exists in the global network. And that is something that I think in this day and age, in the face of polycrisis, in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds that we see through the digital access to what's going on, something as simple and beautiful as volunteerism, which is really what the YWCA is born out of, to see change for good happening simply based on giving, simply based on volunteerism, is something that I see when I'm traveling that I don't always see when I'm operating day to day in the nonprofit NGO sector.
I love that. And the work around the world is varied and yet so similar, as you said, to the work that we do here. We often will label our work as gender-based violence, and yet around the world, we see issues related to gender-based violence, early marriage, and issues happening with young girls and children. And so the work feels so similar and important wherever we are in the world. Family planning is such an important issue. And this overall focus on young women and the leadership of young women is something that you have really championed and elevated at World YWCA during your tenure. And I want to shift a little bit to talk about Goal 2035. And I think for a lot of associations in the US, we're not familiar. We have not been as familiar with Goal 2035, and that we are part of this goal because we are part of the worldwide movement of World YWCA. We are a member of a worldwide movement. That is how we belong and connect together.
Yeah, so the first thing I would say is following up just on the latter half of what you said, Margaret, which is it's interesting for me to see the reality that for the history of the World YWCA global movement, the YWCA USA is a central part of that story from beginning to end. Yet, in the past, in the more recent past, as you said, that's not necessarily understood by all of the really remarkable leaders within the YWCA USA. The YWCA USA that is part of what is the World Council. And the World Council is all of the grassroots leaders throughout the YWCA movement that come together every 4 years to together define what the focus of the following 4 years will be. And in 2011, when they came together, including YWCA USA leaders, there was a discussion about the need to really make a shift within the YWCA and continue to be relevant and reactive, but in a proactive way to what we knew were a lot of global shifts that were occurring. For example, there were a lot of demographic trends toward a youth majority that we knew were coming down the pike, especially in not all regions, but especially in some of our most active regions within the movement. There was a clarity that technology was going to transform the world. There was clarity that there had been successes in human rights and even in gender equality, and that based on historical precedent, we could anticipate a backlash against that. And what were we going to do? Another part of that conversation in 2011 was realizing that the YWCA perhaps hadn't made governance changes, operational changes that matched what was needed in order to continue to really effectively achieve the mission of the World YWCA and the global movement. So there was a commitment that in the following 4 years, there would be a deep and wide consultation. And what came of that was a document, which was called Envisioning 2035. So it was really envisioning what could 2035 look like, not only for the world, but also for the YWCA. And from that came Goal 2035. The heart of Goal 2035 is the belief and the desire and the dictate that young women transform the world and they transform power structures for good. After that came some assumptions about what would happen when that happened, which was moving much further closer to gender equality, moving closer to a world without war, without violence, without conflict, and then also just achieving a sustainable YWCA. So that's Goal 2035. And having traveled to many places around the world to talk to YWCA leaders, and having traveled even further virtually, I can say with great confidence that that Goal 2035 is relevant for every YWCA entity and certainly every YWCA leader.
It's an incredibly powerful goal, and I am energized by it. I do believe that young women have historically led us, that young women are our future, and that if we are to achieve gender equity, which I believe we will and can and must and should, it is important for us to engage young women in that movement. So it's really exciting for me. I think we in the US are a bit behind and need to catch up a little bit with World YWCA in this work. So I'd love to hear how the goal has evolved. What initiatives are you driving? I am familiar with them, and I'm excited to invite everybody to your website where they can read more about the goal and more about the initiatives really enabling the goal to become true and living and active and vibrant. And so if you could just share a little bit about how it is showing up and how we can engage with those initiatives.
Sure. So interestingly, when Goal 2035 was adopted, it did have some operational plans that were associated with it. And it was largely a premise of a digital kind of online platform that would support with modules the leadership of young women, talk about soft skills, capacity, create spaces in which women could come together. And over time, as a theory of change was explored for Goal 2035, and as young women were involved in the discussion of what does it look like to implement this goal, this vision, there was a real shift instead to methods and methodologies to really bring forward the voice of young women and to get behind them and stand with them in their leadership. So that's a real shift. That's about power sharing. That's about honoring and acknowledging young women as leaders now versus perhaps more what some of, I think, the assumption had been that it would be kind of a model of here, we'll fill your cup so you can go forth and do. So we've spent the last few years after doing a clear scan of the movement, really analyzing all the data that we had in front of us together in a holistic way. We, since then, over the past few years, as I said, have worked closely with young women from around the world to develop a few tools. And they're largely focused on two things. One is shifting mindset, or being conscious of mindset, being conscious of how we act, how we work in the world, the practices that we pursue as a YWCA with young women. And I'll talk about a couple of those tools in a minute. And the other are two very practical tools that anyone can utilize, whether it's a staff-based YWCA, a volunteer-based YWCA, a YWCA of 50, or a YWCA of 5,000. So I'll pause there if you wanted to say anything about kind of the matching of mindset versus practical tools. And then at some point, yeah, I'd love to just say a bit about each of them.
Yeah, I think what is so captivating for me is the centering on young women in the work, not in a performative type of way or a tokenizing way, but really as the key drivers around all aspects of this work. It is just so beautiful to be able to see and understand. And, you know, you talk about this work is applicable for a YWCA engaging 50 people or 5,000 people. It really sort of fits and slides in. It doesn't sit on the side. It is not a siloed initiative at all.
Yeah, no, not at all. And the first tool that I'll talk about is the feminist consultation methodology. And that was born out of an idea in terms of Goal 2035. And what's the way in which we actually collect data or be part of a data process with women around the world that where we can use that data to either inform direct service or engagement with community and or inform advocacy. And that was first envisioned in a more traditional way, more historically traditional way, in some offices to be, oh, we'll create an app and quantity. We want quantity. We want to be able to stand behind these numbers and say we've asked these 10 questions of young women all around the world. Well, when we shifted and actually decided to do this work and let go of it, and have young women from around the world co-design a consultation methodology with a third party, a qualified third party, what came back couldn't have been further from that. It was clarity that data that was going to be collected from young women around the world needed to reflect realities and go deep and be qualitative in nature, not quantitative in nature. Mm-hmm. It needed to also be done in such a way that narratives weren't co-opted by the interviewee, that the data wasn't manipulated after the fact. So we also thought that process would take about a year, and through the process, we really decided if we wanted to have an authentic co-design consultative process that it was going to take a lot longer. And 2.5 years later, we have this consultation methodology, which is really a way in which any leader, any volunteer group, any YWCA association can follow this process that is very clear, very user-friendly, very accessible, has inherent expectations of it being customized to community and having community ownership, and can be used to really collect data to be relevant, to be truly responsive, to have an engagement process with community instead of a charity mindset or a dictatorial mindset, or to take action in community based on funding available, for example. So it has a lot of really important applications, including for, I can guarantee, every YWCA that's part of the USA network.
As I look at the methodology, I see this level of authenticity in the process, the data, the evaluation that I haven't seen before, and it is incredibly enriching and expansive, and it is so affirming and powerful. It really sounds like such a simple process, and yet it really does take you places that I don't think we have been, because we've been following a different roadmap, and this really attunes the ear and the heart in a very different way. And from there, we can really enrich our programs and inform our work in a much deeper way.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so the next step, and when you talk about work and informing work, so again, there are a lot of potential external uses for it, for fundraising, certainly for doing advocacy, certainly for identifying external partners that make the most sense and showing them the data and say, this is why it makes sense for us to work together, so on and so on. But also in terms of YWCA nuts and bolts leadership development work, leadership development of young women especially, we have the Rise Up manual guide toolkit, depending on what language it's in, there's a slight twist to that. But that is again, was fully co-designed in its current iteration over a long process with support of the government of Australia. It's its fourth iteration, to really be a leadership development process. So it's not just a program, it's really a process. It's an initiative that ties back to the consultation methodology and can work hand in hand with the consultation methodology. But again, it's more of a nuts and bolts of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is the beginning of what can be what we would understand to be a program of leadership development of young women. But it's created in such a way that it celebrates the leadership of young women even within the program, but also allows weaving in and out and values intergenerational leadership as well. And the way that we have been sharing this with the global movement, and also now with a lot of other women's rights and feminist organizations, is to really show how they're tied together. For so long, one of the sweet sauces of the YWCA, including and especially in USA, has been this connection between advocacy and direct service. Direct service, we learn things, we know things, and then we advocate for systemic change.
Yeah.
And then in the converse. So these two tools really work together to support that sweet sauce of the YWCA.
I love Rise Up and the leadership. As I've met young women who are now leaders and trainers of trainers and moving this work all around the world, I can see this empowerment and the leadership not in a siloed way, but really affecting and infecting every single part of their life, their family, their community. And it gives voice and ability to navigate to positive outcomes in so many different areas. It really is empowerment, sort of captured and in such a beautiful, life-changing way. That's how I have seen it and experienced it from young women who have been doing this work, sharing this work, leading this work, inviting others into this work. It's just incredibly affirming and empowering.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It is. And one of the things, Margaret, you've heard me talk about, which I think is really interesting and perhaps is if we really thought about it, we might be seeing this in spaces more broadly than the YWCA. But as we see YWCA leaders or national or local associations really engage with what you're talking about, this centering of young women leaders, this power sharing, it's another term that's used often. This acceptance of intergenerational leadership, but women of all ages actually being active allies to young women, so on, so on. Over the last 2.5 years or so, for the associations, regardless of their baseline, regardless of where they're beginning in terms of relevancy in the community or vibrancy and engagement or business vitality, regardless of the baseline, for those associations that are really shifting, for the leaders within them that are shifting that mindset and really truly feeling what you're describing and grabbing onto what you're describing, even when it's uncomfortable, we see just tremendous changes in how they're relating to community, the kinds of changes that are happening as part of a movement in their community, the responsiveness that they're receiving from partners, from community members, from elected officials, and so on. And we're really seeing a bifurcation. So I've described one side of it. And then for other associations that aren't there, it's more of a status quo. Even for very strong associations, but we're not seeing a shift from the baseline. And that's about people. That's about the leaders in the association. We're the gatekeepers, right? For any organization that we're working with, each of us as individuals, and then us as a collective community of a YWCA, we're the gatekeepers or not to really acknowledging a shift in potential in leadership and acknowledging the leadership of young women. And we've seen such a struggle in some places. We've also seen where there was a serious struggle and we thought, oh, nothing's ever going to change there. But then there was a change, and it was always because one or two women decided, hold on, let me hold myself accountable. Hold on, what am I part of the problem here? And it's just been tremendous to watch. But at the same time, we really want to be responsive to in that bifurcation, the places where there isn't change happening and there isn't an embrace of intergenerational leadership. So because of that, in a few months, we'll be publishing an intergenerational leadership guide that will go out and really, we hope, be a tool for every association or YWCA leader to use as an individual or within their YWCA community to challenge, right? Because it's funny, because we're supposed to be walking the talk, right? We're the YWCA. We've been about young women's leadership forever, but sometimes, obviously, even within our own organizations, privilege and power is very difficult to give up.
It really is, and I've had to continue to shift my thinking and do a lot of reading within my own heart. And it is beyond just saying the words, because obviously, intellectually, we know how important young women are to our movement, our Y and our W, young women, and yet sometimes we are not activating in a way. And I think goal 35 really reminds me of how we have been remiss and almost absent in our commitment to young women and our commitment to goal 35, which we did make a commitment in 2014 at World Council to commit to this goal. And so it is really important for me that as a network, we do the work of leading and that we begin the process of inviting young women to be trained by leaders around the world in the US, that world leaders come to the US or virtually to train our leaders here to begin the process. And that is so much of what we want to begin doing in 2023 and really have a focus by 2025 and a commitment throughout the network to really embrace this goal, embrace young leadership, and be able to begin working and deeply with the feminist methodology and the rise up leadership. It's essential for young women, not just to be at the table, but to be leading at the front. I have to say that it's been incredibly beautiful to see your work, and you have created so much open sourced content. And that is a bit counterintuitive for us in the US. We like to get all we can. We like to put it in the can. We like to put a lid on it. We like to sit on it. We don't want anybody messing with our can. And yet you've created all of this content as open source. And that just says so much to me. Every time I go in thinking about that, it reveals something else for me. I'd love to hear how you came to that, what the philosophy is around this content that you've created, these initiatives, and yet it is open source content.
Yeah. So when the last World Council was in 2019, and the strategic framework that was adopted had a strong representation of some of the actual World YWCA's observations of how the organization could and should move forward. One of the specific pieces of that where I think there was a fair amount of contribution and almost push by the World YWCA to the council was to message, we have an incredible legacy as a World YWCA movement, and it's 2019, it's a different world. The YWCA historically for a century was often the women's rights organization, was the feminist organization. In tiny cities and big cities all around the world. And that changed. I mean, that began to really shift many decades ago when the YWCA didn't shift with it. So
It's a good shift.
What's that?
It's a good shift because I think it meant that the work that we had been doing as the only feminist organization or as a key driver was working.
Absolutely.
And others were being empowered and shifting into new roles. It is our success.
It is. And we certainly know it to be true because I'm sure you have this experience. And when you're moving through a lot of human rights works or corporate social responsibility sector, you name it, you so often run into women and individuals that say, oh, I worked for the YWCA, or I was on the board. And that plays out. And sometimes it's I was on the board 50 years ago, and sometimes it's 5 years ago. But that's really where you can see that we were really effective, and that YWCA leaders, even when they don't stay in the YWCA, go on to do change for good. So yes, a lot of change for good. But in 2019, we had to say, so what's our unique offering? What's our niche? So the framework was really written to focus in on the niche of the YWCA, being grassroots driven, having had a model of localization for forever, which is now something that every humanitarian and development organization is working to transform their organization to be grassroots driven. But we've been doing it for a long time. We acknowledge that we've believed in intergenerational leadership for forever. We've been working at it. So how do we bring that forth? We know that the investing in the leadership of women and young women, unfortunately, is still the last thing to be tended to. So how do we make sure it stays in the forefront? How do we not lose sight, too, of really assuming that when you invest in the leadership of women and young women, good things will happen? That just pure assumption. So we decided to be accountable to that, Margaret, and the strategic framework represents that. And part of that, if we're going to take ownership of our niche, if we're going to take ownership of our unique contribution as a YWCA, not just for the movement, but for the women's rights and feminist movements, then yeah, we should share that expertise. And that's the premise on which there's this open source information, a very collaborative approach, making everything available, working with individuals that we have no prior connection with that have said, we want to translate these things into a different language. Will you let us? And we say, yeah, as long as we work closely, sure. And it's exciting. And I think it places, again, YWCA uniquely in a key spot within not only the human rights movement, but the human rights movement at a time when human rights defenders are finding it very difficult again to be safe, when civil space continues to shrink and not expand, when, like I said before, there's a huge backlash not only against gender equality and gender equity efforts, but also against all sorts of progress that have been made in human rights and stability, geopolitical stability. A lot of things are moving in reverse. So it's even more important that we really act as a catalyst, not only within our movement, but try to act as a catalyst for our colleagues and peers within a shared collective human rights, women's rights movement.
I certainly want the network to know that this is the first time, this won't be the last time around that we are going to be talking about Goal 2035, hearing about it, learning about it. This is really a high priority for us moving forward. This is about eliminating racism and empowering women. And part of the strategy, part of the channel through which we will do that has to be about elevating and raising up young leadership. And World clearly has been leading the way and has an incredible methodology. And I'm excited to be able to really embrace this work in a new and powerful and important way. So we invite everyone. There's so much information on the World website. If you haven't visited recently, I encourage you to do that. And you can be assured that through our national conference and throughout 2023, there is more to come, and rising up a team of young leaders to be able to support us in this work. So I'm really excited and grateful and just encouraged about the future. But the future, I love looking at the future, and I love looking at the past. And as Roxanne opened us up, she talked a little bit about Addie Hall-Zuma, who was a leader here in the US and became a powerful leader, here in the US with the YWCA movement, and then became an even more powerful leader in South Africa during apartheid. But her story is powerful, but it isn't unusual. There are amazing, amazing women that we often aren't as familiar with, who have been incredible leaders in the world movement.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, honestly, the stories are endless, and I'd like to think that if I fell into a large basket of cash, perhaps I might try to catalog all of it. I mean, it's it's recently, well, so I was just in South America and was happy to reconnect and hug Valeria, who was a young woman who served on the World Board prior to this current quadrennia. And I've known her, and she's a strong leader, impactful leader. Most recently was leading an LGBTQIA effort in an area of South America where that takes a lot of bravery and courage. She's really acting as a human rights defender. And then we traveled to a different city, and we met with some elders of the local YWCA there. And we were she was speaking Spanish, I was speaking mostly English, some Spanish, and we were communicating. And you know, Margaret, her history, it was just one of those examples. She just started sharing everything that she's done as part of the YWCA since she was a teenager. And I think she's in her late 80s now, including with the YWCA of San Diego for some period of time, including with the YWCA of Dallas-Fort Worth. And she, I won't, so she just, she's a woman who won't ever she might make the history books of her local community, but there probably won't be a book written on her. But those women are out there everywhere, and some certainly have incredibly illustrious stories that are so interwoven with, for example, the anti-apartheid movement. And then some are just illustrious, but they will never become an academic tomb, you know, that is captured for all of history. And I do think it's phenomenal. And what I want, one of the reasons I brought her up is that she expressed after that meeting, she said she felt such relief and peace of heart, because when she was a young woman with a worldwide movement, it was centering the leadership of young women, including YWCA USA. That was the focus. And she said, she basically said, I can't believe it's come full circle, and I have a peace of heart. So yeah, and if we look at these historical, whether there's a book about them or whether it's storytelling, when we really listen carefully, there's so much wisdom to learn. And I think we can only hope that new wisdom is being created right now, that, you know, 10, 20, 60 years from now will be reflected on by individuals then as well.
The YWCA collective is just such a powerful group of individuals, just transforming and making change in all communities, in so many different countries around the world. It is incredibly inspiring. Last summer, I had an opportunity to be with a former board chair. Her name is Anna Stallard. I know that you know Anne as well. And she shared with me and the USA board a powerful story of being a woman in South Africa and meeting Nelson Mandela. And she had an opportunity to say who she was and who she was with. And when he heard she was with the YWCA, he flew his arms up and hugged her and thanked her, and thanked the YWCA movement for teaching and empowering women, particularly around the vote. And when she told the story, I was in a rubble of tears. I was just so overwhelmed because this is power. This is power. We sometimes forget the power that is happening today in local associations in the US, as well as all around the world in so many amazing countries.
That's right. Yeah, I was on the side of a soccer field about, I don't know, 5 to 10 years ago, maybe, yeah, in between there, and chatting with a father who I had been sharing that soccer sideline with for many years. And he finally said, "So what keeps you busy during the day?" And I said, "Oh, I work for, you know, a women's racial justice organization. I was with the USA then." He was immediately intrigued. "Tell me more." And then he said, "What's it called?" And I said, the YWCA. And he just started crying. I mean, just like that on its and I felt very compassionate and empathetic, and I said, are you okay? And he that only made it worse. And he finally said, he grew up in a state in the Midwest, and he said the YWCA was everything to me and my mother when I was growing up. Without the YWCA, we wouldn't have been safe. My mom wouldn't have had her schooling. She wouldn't have become financially independent. And those stories I hear I mean, not, you know, I have YWCA running through my blood at this point, but that happens all the time. And sometimes, you know, I really hope that YWCA leaders all around the world, including everyone in USA, really, I think it's easy to lose touch and not be grounded in the impact that the YWCA has on individuals and families and community.
I agree.
Yeah.
Totally agree. We do too often, I think, lose sight of just the tremendous impact that we do have.
Yeah.
You know, speaking of impact, I wanted to just talk a little bit about World Service Council. Again, another incredible organization within the YWCA USA structure, and
Yes.
one that I think a lot of associations aren't familiar with, don't know how to access, don't know the history. And we are really, I want to be able to invite YWCA USA, all of our network, to learn about the World Service Council, to understand our history, and to become a member. And be involved in this world movement. It is one of the powerful ways we today, right? So Goal 2035 is a way our associations can get involved in this work. But as individuals, as board members, as staff members, we can become members of World Service Council. And it is just incredible organization.
It is. And I was familiar with the World Service Council before I began to work really closely with the World YWCA. And I knew it to be a really dedicated, dogged, almost very committed group of women from the United States who really wanted to be accountable to being global citizens, to engaging with leaders, not just within the United States, not just within North America, but globally, and doing it from a position of curiosity versus a position of charity, to do it from a position of humbleness versus a position of hubris, knowing that the sometimes that centrality, that single-minded focus that citizens of the US take on, knowing that they didn't want to do that, but instead they wanted to really be part of and engage with the global movement instead of kind of engage at the global movement. And I always found that very admirable, and learned a lot. But when I joined World YWCA, I had a blind spot that that now is not, is very colorful, and no longer blank. And that is that there are women all around the world who hold those same women of the World Service Council in admiration and such high regard. You know, my point of view was as being part of the YWCA USA and not really seeing the admiration, the respect that the women of the World Service Council were held by the global movement. And also, in so many ways, so many young women around the world now of many ages who said they invested as me as a young woman leader, because that is one of the ways in which the World Service Council, with the funds that they raise, that's how they've spent it, is to say we are going to support in a very generous and non-restrictive way the leadership of young women. And there are young women of all ages now, all throughout the world, who acknowledge that that was due to YWCA USA and World Service Council. And I had that was a blank spot, but like I said, now it's very colorful.
So World Service Council is really formed and founded in the 1920s?
Yeah, so they had their 100-year anniversary last year, so, or in 2021. So yeah, about 100 years old, yes.
And as it is a part of YWCA USA, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is part of our structure at the national office,
Yeah.
and it is a almost an alumni organization, but any staff person, board member, community member can become a member of World Service Council. And at one point, World Service Council, they traveled extensively around the world. They have been known to be able to come together as a membership and provide emergency funding at times to associations around the world. They are advocates for the world movement, and they are also involved in engaging a cohort every year of young women to be a collective, and they come from every corner of the world, including the US. And this cohort comes together annually and experiences the leadership of world, and they learn about each other and the methodologies, and they are just an incredible cohort sponsored by World Service Council. And it is also community of like-minded individuals who want to see the world movement thrive.
Yeah.
What am I missing about World Service Council that you would, add? What else do you want us to know about this amazing group of individuals?
Yeah, I think I would just underline this kind of approach of accountability, of listening. That's the word I want, of really listening to the global movement without their own agenda. And I think that's hard. I think that's hard to sustain over time, but it has been sustained over time, and it's quite something. I was on a phone call with Joyce Mims a few months ago. I think it was around the holidays, and she is a longtime supporter of the World Service Council and leader of the World Service Council. And I was just floored. I'm always floored when I talk to Joyce, but the reason I was really floored and just in all of her was that she listened very carefully to everything. She had lots of questions about what's going on with the global movement, what's going on for women and girls in this country, in this region. And I could tell she was listening. And I'm sure that that's why she's been such a really consistent, impactful leader for World Service Council, that ability to listen and be and sit with it and then think, how can I engage? How can I be part of this? How can I be part of change for good? So, and that behavior, that ability, of course, shows up for so many of the women of the World Service Council. I think it's one of the ethos of the council. And the last thing that I would just name that I just think is remarkable and maybe shows that ability to listen. For many, many years, the World Service Council had a building fund, and that was to be responsive to what were then less often natural and man-made disasters, really being able to be responsive and react to what could be an existential crisis for a member association. And then secondly, there's also one of the leaders of the World Service Council for many, many years has provided an emergency fund for the General Secretary of the World YWCA. That's really listening. That's acknowledging that there's times when you want to be responsive and be uniquely responsive and fill a crack that won't be filled otherwise. So those are just some examples of, in a really practical way, how that listening and engaging with instead of engaging at plays out for the council, the World Service Council.
We'll be sharing with the network how they can become a member, and so we'll be getting that information out. And there'll also be an opportunity at our national conference to meet folks from World Council and engage with World Service Council and just have an opportunity to learn more about the workings and become involved. And I'm really excited about it. I've learned so much from the membership. They are an incredibly valuable part of how I see my leadership, and they've just enabled me to have a real deep understanding of our role in the world, of our history in the U.S. in being a valued partner for associations around the world, and what might be possible for us together. I do think that ever more so than ever before, our ability as American women of color, to recognize how we are tethered to other women around the world. We have so much to learn. We have so much to share. And there is this just incredible opportunity, I think, with World Service Council to really activate that. And so I'm excited to see a reconnection, if you will, a reawakening. I want to talk about annual meeting, World YWCA annual business meeting coming up in November. And while there certainly are voting delegates from North America, there is an opportunity and an invitation for everyone to attend that meeting. And then there'll be an upcoming World Council meeting. And then, of course, World YWCA Day, which is what we're celebrating. Just thinking about various ways that we can celebrate. So I know that's a lot, 3 things for you to share with us.
Yeah, so the 30th World Council is coming up in November 2023. We'll be holding it as a virtual business meeting. So we've separated the business meeting from what is a typical week or 2-long week conference business meeting historically. So we're really excited about the business meeting in November. One of the reasons that the board decided to make this shift, probably the most compelling reason, was to really walk our talk around equal representation and delegations, not just delegations that could afford to travel, easily afford to travel, buy a plane ticket, have accommodations, and or get a visa, which is very difficult, and it is much more difficult post-COVID, to really to really acknowledge that those limitations created a pervasive obstacle for full participation at council by every member association. So they made the really, I think, courageous and exciting shift to hold the business meeting virtually. We anticipate a really important constitutional amendment change, which would allow us actually to hold these council meetings electronically or in a hybrid fashion moving forward in perpetuity. We were able to do it this year because of exceptions to Swiss law where we're incorporated, but we hope that the decision is made to be able to hold these meetings electronically and in a hybrid format, again, to ensure full participation, and secondly, to be far more nimble in the 21st century as a global movement, because meeting every 4 years doesn't cut it anymore. And then, yeah, we're anticipating a summit in 2024 for the entire movement to come together and really pursue plenary and consultation and trainings and workshop and networking and exchange and just being together. And also probably inviting peer or women's rights movements and feminist movements. And then, yeah, we have our World YWCA Day on April 24th, right around the corner. This year, we're highlighting safe spaces because no matter what YWCA network, movement, or community that you're a part of, now and always in the past, the YWCA creates safe spaces. Whether it's a literal safe space, whether it is a safe space in a courtroom as a survivor is going through a trial related to an abusive situation, whether it's housing that is safe and provides the stability that a family needs in order to pursue those things that they have a right to, a human right to, whether it's protection against cultural norms that result in mutilation of one's body, and so on and so on. We know that the YWCA, besides intergenerational leadership, if there's anything that we can hold on to as a legacy, it's safe spaces. So we're really naming that and taking the opportunity of our newly published safe space guide, which includes virtual, and again was co-designed with young women over a sustained period of time, called Our Spaces, Power Spaces, named by women around the world. We're really taking the opportunity to highlight that, the new publication, and bring it to all YWCA leaders, including everyone in the US, but also have this be an opportunity to have a collective moment to name those, how YWCA's practice safe space, all the unique ways in order to achieve transformation, individual, community, regional, national, international transformation.
Powerful.
Yeah, and that was sent out, I think that went out this morning. So on the internal newsletter of the YWCA, which is open to any YWCA volunteer or leader, you can subscribe. It's very easy. So if you know, Margaret, you've been a real cheerleader for making sure that leaders in the US know that they can subscribe to that newsletter.
So we will be lifting up all these items. I certainly hope that we have both the delegation and other YWCA leaders from the US attending in 2024 at the World Council meeting. It sounds just exciting and powerful. The annual business meeting is so important for us to be able to attend. We are members. I invite all of the USA network to join me in attending the annual business meeting. We are members in good standing, and we are really proud to be part of this worldwide movement. There is so much for us to be able to learn. We are not an island. We're part of a global movement, and that is just so powerful for me.
Yeah.
before we bring Roxanne back to close this out, I just want to thank you, Casey. I just really enjoy learning from you and spending time with you. I want this to be one of many conversations. I'm looking forward to a next step and a deeper step in terms of our commitment to Goal 2035. And just thank you today for making time in your schedule to be with us.
Thanks, Margaret. And I'd like to take a moment to just thank you, which I do privately quite often, and really acknowledge, earlier in our conversation, I talked about gatekeeping, sometimes intentional, oftentimes not. That can happen at the national association level or at the leadership level, staff executive, staff leadership level, that can prevent the global movement. It almost creates stoppages within this very dynamic global movement. And you not only have not done that, but you, I believe, have actively gone in the other direction and really have consistently, since last January, identified so many ways in which you were going to go in the opposite direction and ensure that we come back together and we work together in such a way, like Valeria's grandmother in South America identified. We've been there before, and you have such a clear vision of how we can do that together, and it is exciting, and I'm very thankful and grateful for your leadership.
Thank you, Casey. We are stronger together, and there is so much work for us to do. We are quite a ways away from gender equity, and it is going to take every single one of us in order to achieve that. Yeah. And along the path of gender equity, our ability to achieve the highest level of racial equity when racism is rare and brief really will take a seismic movement. And so thank you. I am proud to be part of this world movement and really want to usher in a new generation of young leaders and our network who are more engaged than ever before and more committed to the world movement. So this is our path. This is our commitment to each other, really. So I want to hand it back to Roxanne at this time, and thank you so much for Casey for joining us today.
Thanks, Margaret, for having me.
Thank you, Casey and Margaret. What a great discussion. To close, I wanted to include the work being uncovered in our Smith College archives. I have uncovered 4 magazines produced by YWCA spanning the course of 1894 to 1973, including the International Messenger, Association Monthly, Women's Press, and YWCA Magazine. In those magazines, there are countless articles describing the work that both the World YWCA and YWCA USA have done in our long history together. I mentioned one such article entitled Signs of Hope, Our World Links in our opening. This one describing our World YWCA Day meeting on April 24th of 1955, and the strides our movement have taken 68 years ago after World War II. With this meeting between you and Margaret, I want to end with a mantra spoken at the World YWCA Day in 1955. No woman is an island. We are a world movement.